Right at this very moment, somewhere inside your body, a pill you have trusted for years may be behaving in a way it never used to. Nothing changed about the pill itself. What changed is you. The same dose that once moved through your system quietly can now sit there longer, push a little harder, lean a little more on your heart. And here's what makes this so dangerous. There's no pain when it starts. No warning light on a dashboard. Just a slow, silent shift happening in the background while you go about an ordinary Tuesday. Today, I want to walk you through 5 medications that, after 60, have been linked to a measurably higher risk of heart attack and stroke. Some of them you've probably never questioned in your life. One of them, millions of people take every single morning without a second thought, the way you'd brush your teeth. But before you panic, this is not about fear. This is about understanding what's actually happening inside your body so you can ask sharper questions and make better decisions. I want you to stay with me through all 5, because the one that surprises people most isn't the first one. It isn't even the third. It's the very last one. And once you hear it, you'll understand why so many people never saw it coming. What country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments before we get started. I read every single one. Now, here is something most people are never told in a doctor's office. Your body does not process medication the way it used to. Your liver, the organ responsible for breaking most drugs down into something your body can clear out, slows with age. Your kidneys, the filtration system that removes waste and excess substances from your blood, lose some of their capacity too. So a drug that used to clear your system in a day might now linger for 2 or 3. The same dose you've taken faithfully since your 50s can begin acting like a stronger dose, without anyone ever changing a single pill. That's only half the story. Your blood vessels change as well. They lose flexibility, almost like a hose left out in the sun for 20 years, slowly losing its give. The inner lining becomes more reactive to stress. The delicate balance between clotting and bleeding shifts. So when a medication nudges any one of these systems, even gently, the effect doesn't stay small. It gets amplified, layer by layer, year by year. Here is what nobody tells you in a routine checkup. The medication itself usually isn't the villain in this story. It may have been exactly right when it was first prescribed, years or even decades ago. The real problem is that prescriptions, once written, often get refilled automatically, year after year, without anyone sitting down and asking the one question that actually matters. Does this still make sense for the body I have today? Not because anyone is careless. Because in a 7-minute appointment, squeezed between 2 other patients, that conversation rarely has room to happen. That's a system problem. Not your doctor's fault, and certainly not yours either. Now, before we go further, I want you to picture someone. Let's call her Margaret. She represents a pattern I've seen described again and again, the kind of story that repeats itself in waiting rooms across the country. Margaret is 68, a retired school librarian, the kind of woman who still color codes her pill organizer every Sunday night at her kitchen table. She has been on the exact same 5 medications for almost 9 years. Same doses. Same times. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, just routine. Picture her sitting in an exam room, hands folded in her lap, telling her doctor she's been feeling unusually tired lately. Not sick exactly, just heavier somehow, slower getting up the stairs to her bedroom. She mentions it almost apologetically, the way people do when they assume it's just age catching up with them. That visit, that one offhand comment, is where her story actually begins to turn. We'll come back to Margaret, piece by piece, as we go. Let's start with the first medication. Something so common most people never think twice before reaching for it. Number 1, anti-inflammatory pain relievers. Ibuprofen, naproxen. The same little orange bottle that's been sitting in your medicine cabinet for 15 years, refilled without thought every time it runs low. You feel an ache in your knee or your lower back, you take one, the ache eases, and you move on with your day. Simple, reliable, or so it seems. But pay close attention to this. These medications work by blocking certain enzymes involved in driving inflammation. That's what brings down the pain. But here is the catch nobody mentions. Those same enzymes also play a protective role around your blood vessels and help regulate how blood flows through your body. After 60, your arteries are already less flexible than they were at 40. When this protective system gets interrupted, even slightly, your blood vessels can tighten. Blood pressure creeps upward, quietly, gradually, in a way you simply cannot feel happening in real time. At the same time, these medications can cause your kidneys to hold on to more sodium and water than usual. Now you have two things stacking on top of each other at once: rising blood pressure, rising fluid load. For a cardiovascular system that is already working harder after 60 just to keep up with daily life, that combination starts to matter a great deal. Large studies tracking thousands of patients have connected frequent, long-term use of these pain relievers with a measurably higher risk of heart attack and stroke, particularly in older adults or those who already carry other cardiovascular risk factors. This doesn't mean you throw the bottle in the trash today. Occasional, short-term use for a sprained ankle or a bad headache is a completely different story than daily use, year after year, without anyone ever checking back in. The relief from these pills is immediate. The cost builds slowly, invisibly, in the background. That's exactly why it gets missed so often, by patients and sometimes even by busy doctors. Now, I need to be crystal clear about something important here. If you are taking blood pressure medication, anti-inflammatory drugs can work directly against it, blunting its effect and pushing your numbers back up. If you are taking blood thinners, combining them with anti-inflammatory pain relievers raises bleeding risk significantly, especially in the stomach. And if you have any history of kidney problems, these medications place extra strain on filtration that your kidneys may not be able to absorb anymore. Start with the lowest effective dose. Never exceed what's printed on the label without your doctor's guidance. And if you notice swelling in your ankles, unusual shortness of breath, or a sudden change in how much you're urinating, stop and call your doctor right away. Now, you might be thinking, I know what you're thinking. That sounds too simple to be a real cardiovascular risk. I understand the skepticism. But this is one of the most well-documented medication risks in older adults, repeated across multiple large population studies over decades. But if you think that one is subtle, wait until you hear about the second. This one hides even better. Number 2, acid reducers. You probably know these by name, even if you've never thought of them as a medication in the traditional sense. The daily heartburn pill. The little capsule that quiets your stomach so effectively you almost forget you're even taking it anymore. It becomes background noise, like a light switch you flip without thinking. Here is the part that surprises even me, and I've reviewed this mechanism more times than I can count. Stomach acid isn't just there to cause discomfort and inconvenience. It plays an essential role in helping your body absorb magnesium, calcium, and vitamin B12 from the food you eat. Long-term use of acid-reducing medication can quietly chip away at how much of these nutrients your body actually takes in, month after month, year after year. Now follow this connection closely, because this is where it gets important. Magnesium helps stabilize your heart's electrical rhythm. Low magnesium levels raise the risk of irregular heartbeat, sometimes significantly. Calcium balance affects how your blood vessels constrict and relax. Vitamin B12 supports both nerve health and the integrity of the lining inside your blood vessels. When these nutrient levels slowly decline over months and years, your entire cardiovascular system becomes more vulnerable, without a single dramatic symptom ever announcing itself. There's a second layer here too, one that researchers are still actively studying. Some research suggests long-term use of these medications may affect something called the endothelium, that paper-thin inner lining covering every blood vessel in your body. Think of it like the non-stick coating inside a pan. When that coating wears down, everything sticks. Everything gets harder. Friction increases everywhere. That lining controls clotting, blood flow, and how well your vessels relax under pressure. When it stops functioning the way it should, vascular risk climbs. Most people start this medication for a short-term issue, a few weeks of bad heartburn, some stomach irritation from another medication, and they just never stop. Not because it's inherently wrong to take it long-term in some cases, because nobody ever circled back, months or years later, to ask if it's still needed at this dose, for this long. Now, here's what matters for you directly. If you've been on this kind of medication for more than a year, ask your doctor about checking your magnesium and B12 levels at your next blood draw. It's a simple test, often included in routine panels, and correcting a deficiency early is far easier than addressing it after it has already affected your heart rhythm. If you're also taking certain heart medications, low magnesium can make those medications behave unpredictably, so this isn't a small detail to skip past. Let me tell you something about Margaret here, because this is where her story connects. One of her 5 medications was exactly this kind, an acid reducer she'd been prescribed almost a decade earlier for a brief bout of reflux that, frankly, had resolved itself years ago. She simply never stopped. It had become invisible to her, the way a piece of furniture becomes invisible once it's been in the same corner of a room for years. When her doctor finally checked her blood work, her magnesium was sitting near the bottom edge of normal, not alarming on its own, but worth noting alongside everything else. Now let's talk about something that touches a part of your life you might not expect: your sleep and the quiet hours when your body is supposed to be repairing itself. Number 3, medications for anxiety and sleep. Diazepam, lorazepam. The pills that quiet a racing mind at 2 in the morning or help you finally drift off after lying awake, staring at the ceiling. For many people past 60, especially those navigating grief, loneliness, or the simple disruption that comes with aging, these don't feel like medication at all. They feel like a lifeline. But here is what's happening underneath the surface. These drugs slow activity across your entire central nervous system. That's the calming effect you feel. But that same slowing reaches your breathing, your reaction time, your coordination, your balance. And after 60, your body becomes noticeably more sensitive to these effects. They linger longer in your system. The sedative effect grows stronger over time, even at the exact same dose you've taken faithfully for years without any change. That growing sedation often translates into less movement throughout the day, less time on your feet, more time sitting, more time lying still, more naps that stretch longer than intended. And here's something that matters more than most people realize. Circulation depends heavily on movement. When you move less, blood flow becomes measurably less efficient, and the risk of clot formation creeps upward quietly in the background. There's one more layer worth understanding. These medications can also affect breathing patterns during sleep itself, sometimes worsening shallow breathing or making existing sleep apnea noticeably worse. When oxygen levels dip repeatedly through the night, even slightly, your heart absorbs extra strain while you're supposed to be resting and recovering. It doesn't feel dramatic in the moment. It feels like fatigue, slower mornings, things you'd normally chalk up to simply getting older, when in reality, something specific and identifiable is happening. Now, I need to be crystal clear about something important here, because this matters enormously. If you are taking these medications alongside opioid pain medication, the combined sedative effect on breathing can become dangerous, and this combination deserves direct discussion with your doctor. If you have any history of falls, the coordination effects of these medications raise that risk substantially, particularly at night when getting up to use the bathroom. And if you've noticed your partner mentioning that your breathing sounds different at night, pauses, gasps, snoring that's worse than before, bring that up directly, because it may be connected. None of what I'm sharing today means you should stop any medication on your own, suddenly, without guidance. That decision belongs to you and your doctor together, made carefully, never made alone, and never made abruptly, especially with medications like these where stopping suddenly carries its own serious risks. If you're finding this helpful so far, tap like right now. It costs you nothing, but it helps this information reach someone else out there who genuinely needs to hear it today. Let's keep going, because the next one hides in plain sight, sitting on a shelf in nearly every pharmacy, grabbed without a second thought during cold and allergy season. Number 4, decongestants. Pseudoephedrine and similar cold medications. Easy to grab off the shelf without a prescription. No conversation with a pharmacist required in most cases, which makes them feel completely harmless, almost like candy compared to a real prescription medication. But here's the mechanism at work, and it's worth understanding clearly. Decongestants work by constricting blood vessels. That's literally the mechanism by which they shrink swelling in your sinuses and clear up that stuffy, pressured feeling. But that constriction doesn't stay politely confined to your nose. It reaches blood vessels throughout your entire body, including the ones feeding directly into your heart. Vessels tighten everywhere at once, blood pressure rises, heart rate climbs, and your heart has to work noticeably harder to push blood through a narrower, tighter system. In a younger body with flexible, elastic arteries, this effect is usually tolerated without much consequence. After 60, when arteries are already stiffer and less forgiving, that added squeeze becomes more significant, especially if you already have elevated blood pressure or take other medications that affect your cardiovascular system in their own quiet ways. And this is exactly where it becomes genuinely dangerous, because most people aren't taking just one thing in isolation. a blood pressure pill in the morning, a pain reliever in the afternoon, something for sleep at night. Then a cold hits during the holidays, and a decongestant gets added right on top of everything else. Each one alone might seem perfectly manageable. Together, stacked one on top of another, they start interacting in ways nobody ever sat down and planned for. Here's what you actually need to know before your next cold season. If you have any history of high blood pressure, look for decongestant alternatives labeled specifically safe for hypertension and ask your pharmacist directly rather than guessing from the shelf. If you take medication for an irregular heartbeat, decongestants can interact directly with that rhythm. And if your heart starts racing, you feel chest tightness, or you notice a pounding sensation after taking one of these, stop immediately and don't wait it out. This is exactly why a sudden cardiovascular event so often feels like it came completely out of nowhere, shocking the family, shocking even the person it happened to. It didn't come from nowhere. It was building quietly, invisibly, for a long time before that moment arrived. Now, the one that tends to surprise people the most out of all five, not because it's rare or obscure, because it is absolutely everywhere, trusted by nearly everyone. Number 5, low-dose aspirin. For decades, a small daily aspirin was considered an almost automatic, near-universal way to protect your heart. Doctors recommended it broadly. Family members passed the advice down to each other. And for people who've already had a heart attack or stroke, or who carry specific high-risk conditions identified by their doctor, it still plays an important, well-established protective role today. But here's what changed, and changed significantly in recent years. More recent, large-scale research shows that for many adults over 60 who have never had a cardiovascular event, routine daily aspirin may not provide the broad protective benefit once widely assumed. In some cases, for some people, it may actually raise overall risk rather than lower it. Aspirin works by making platelets less likely to stick together and clump, which helps prevent dangerous clots from forming. But clotting also protects you in everyday life. It's literally how your body stops bleeding whenever a vessel gets nicked or damaged. After 60, blood vessels become more fragile, and the lining of your digestive tract grows more sensitive than it once was. So when aspirin reduces clotting ability in this changed context, it can raise the risk of internal bleeding, particularly in the stomach or, more seriously, in the brain. Here's the part that matters most, the part that genuinely surprised even me when I first studied it closely. There are two distinct kinds of stroke. One caused by a clot blocking blood flow somewhere in the brain. One caused by bleeding inside the brain itself. Aspirin can lower the risk of the first kind and, in certain people, raise the risk of the second kind. After 60, without a clear prior cardiovascular history, that delicate balance can tip in the wrong direction. That's exactly what updated, more recent clinical guidelines have started to reflect, shifting away from the blanket recommendations of decades past. Now, this is critical, so listen closely. If you've never had a heart attack or stroke and you're taking daily aspirin simply as a precaution, this is precisely the conversation worth having at your next appointment. If you bruise more easily than you used to, notice dark stool, or have any history of stomach ulcers, these are signals worth raising immediately. And I want to be absolutely clear. If you have had a previous cardiovascular event, this conversation looks completely different, and aspirin likely remains an important part of your protection. Never stop taking prescribed aspirin without your doctor's direct guidance, regardless of anything you hear in a video like this one. Many people started this medication years or even decades ago under older guidelines that have since evolved and simply never revisited the decision. Not because anyone was careless or negligent, because it felt safe, automatic, almost invisible, the way a habit becomes part of the furniture of your daily routine. So here's the real question, sitting underneath all 5 of these medications we've just walked through together. It was never really about whether any single medication, on its own, is purely good or purely bad. It's about whether the way you're taking it today still matches the body you actually have today, not the body you had 10 or 15 years ago when the prescription was first written. Now let's go back to Margaret for a moment, because her story brings this entire picture together. At that appointment where she mentioned feeling unusually tired, her doctor finally took the time to pull her full medication list and review it line by line, something that hadn't happened in years. 5 medications, 9 years of refills, an acid reducer from a reflux issue that had resolved long ago, an occasional anti-inflammatory she'd started taking almost daily for arthritis without realizing the shift, a sleep aid she'd grown quietly dependent on, and yes, a daily low-dose aspirin she'd started in her late 50s after a coworker recommended it, with no cardiovascular event in her history to justify it. Layered together, each one reasonable in isolation, but never reviewed as a complete picture. Her doctor didn't dramatically pull her off everything at once. That's not how responsible medicine works, and it's not what I'm suggesting for you either. Instead, over the following months, adjustments were made carefully, one at a time. The acid reducer was tapered with a plan to monitor her reflux symptoms. The anti-inflammatory was switched to occasional use only, paired with other approaches for her arthritis pain. The aspirin, given her lack of cardiovascular history, was discussed at length and eventually discontinued under medical guidance. Magnesium and B12 levels were checked and gently corrected. Her fatigue, the thing that brought her into that office in the first place, improved gradually over the following months. Not overnight, not dramatically, but meaningfully. I want to pause here and set realistic expectations, because Margaret's experience represents a pattern, not a guarantee. Some people notice changes faster, some slower. Some may find that all 5 medications remain genuinely appropriate for them after a thorough review, and that's a perfectly good outcome too. What matters most isn't a dramatic before and after. It's the fact that someone finally asked the right question and took the time to look closely. Now, what we've covered so far gives you a clear picture of where these risks actually come from. But the most important part is still ahead of us, because understanding the problem is only half of the equation. What truly matters is what you do with this information moving forward. If there's one thing I want you to take away from everything we've covered today, it's this. The real risk was never really the medication itself sitting quietly in its bottle. It's taking it the exact same way, year after year, while your body is no longer the same body it was when that prescription was first written. Because after 60, your body isn't simply an older version of what it used to be. It functions differently at a fundamental level. It processes substances differently. It responds differently under stress. And it tolerates imbalance far less easily than it once did. That means even small mismatches, small excesses, small unexamined interactions can carry a far larger impact than they would have decades earlier. And this is where many people unknowingly fall into a pattern without ever realizing it. They continue doing what has always worked. They trust what has always been prescribed. They follow the same routine day after day, year after year, never quite realizing that the underlying context of their own body has quietly shifted beneath them. This isn't about anyone doing something wrong. It's about something that simply was never clearly explained in the first place. Because in medicine, there's a concept that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Not everything needs to be added. Sometimes things need to be adjusted, reduced, or thoughtfully reconsidered. And that process deserves just as much attention as starting a new treatment in the first place. Now, here's where this becomes genuinely empowering rather than simply concerning. Because once you understand this principle, you start to see your own health differently. You stop viewing medications as fixed, permanent fixtures, and you begin to see them as tools. Tools that need to be used at the right time, in the right way, for the right stage of your life. When that alignment is correct, they can be incredibly helpful, even life-saving. But when that alignment quietly drifts, even slightly, that's exactly where risk begins to accumulate. Think back through the 5 medications we discussed together today. Pain relievers, genuinely helpful for reducing inflammation, but capable of raising blood pressure and fluid retention when used long-term without review. Acid reducers, useful for protecting a sensitive stomach, but capable of disrupting nutrient balance and vascular function over years of continuous use. Anxiety and sleep medications, calming the nervous system effectively, but potentially reducing movement, altering breathing, and affecting circulation along the way. Decongestants, clearing sinus congestion efficiently, but tightening blood vessels and raising cardiovascular strain throughout the body. And aspirin, genuinely protective against clot formation in the right context, but capable of increasing bleeding risk when used without a clear, current indication. Each one of these has real value. Each one also has a threshold, a point where the balance can shift from helpful to harmful. And that threshold isn't fixed in stone. It moves with age. It moves with changes happening inside your body. It moves with every other medication you're taking, with your lifestyle, with underlying conditions you may or may not even know you have yet. That's exactly why awareness matters more than almost anything else in this conversation. because awareness leads to sharper questions. And sharper questions lead consistently to better decisions, appointment after appointment, year after year. So let's talk practically about what this actually looks like in your own life, step by step. First, review your medications regularly, not only when something goes wrong. Once a year, ideally around the same time, perhaps tied to your annual checkup so it's easy to remember, sit down with your full list. Every prescription, every over-the-counter pill, every supplement. Bring the actual bottles if it helps, not just a mental list, because it's remarkably easy to forget something that's become automatic. Second, pay attention to combinations, not just individual medications. Most of the risk we've discussed today doesn't come from any single pill working alone. It comes from several stacking together, including over-the-counter products you barely think of as medication at all, things like the cold remedy in your bathroom cabinet or the daily supplement you started years ago and never reconsidered. Third, notice the quiet signals your body is already giving you. Unusual fatigue that doesn't match your activity level. Lightheadedness when you stand up too quickly. Shortness of breath during things that used to feel effortless, like climbing a single flight of stairs. Changes in sleep quality that you've quietly accepted as simply getting older. Write these down if it helps. Patterns are far easier to spot on paper than they are to remember during a rushed appointment. And finally, understand that your body isn't static, and your medications shouldn't be treated as static either. What worked perfectly at 50 isn't automatically right at 70. That's not a failure on anyone's part. That's simply how the body evolves, and your medication routine deserves to evolve right alongside it. Let that sink in for a moment. The danger was never really the medication. It was taking it the same way while your body quietly became someone different. Here is something simple but powerful you can do at your very next appointment. Instead of only discussing new symptoms, ask this one question. Write it down beforehand if you need to so you don't forget in the moment. Is everything I'm currently taking still right for me at this stage of life? That single question shifts the entire conversation from adding to evaluating, from reacting to optimizing. This information complements your doctor's care. It never replaces it. Print out the references in the description, bring them with you, and a good doctor will welcome that conversation rather than dismiss it. If your doctor seems rushed or dismissive when you raise this, it's completely reasonable to request a separate appointment specifically for a medication review. Many clinics offer exactly this kind of visit. Now, another point worth understanding deeply before we close. Your body gives you signals. Not always loud ones. Not always dramatic ones that send you straight to an emergency room, but consistent ones if you learn to actually notice them. These signals are not always dramatic, but they are meaningful. They're often the earliest indicators that something inside your system needs a second look. And when you pair that personal awareness with regular, proactive medication review, you create a level of control over your own health that most people, frankly, never develop. Here is where everything we've discussed today truly comes together. The difference between reacting to a heart attack or stroke after the fact and genuinely preventing one before it ever happens often comes down to small, unglamorous adjustments made early. Not one dramatic intervention, not one big change made in a panic, but a series of small, informed decisions that keep your entire system in balance over months and years. And this is exactly where you have far more influence than you might currently believe. Because while you may not control every single risk factor in your life, you absolutely do control your own awareness. You control whether you ask the hard questions. And you control whether your current medication routine still genuinely matches the body you actually have today, not the body you had when these prescriptions first began. That's what actually makes the difference in the long run. Not fear, not blind avoidance of necessary medication, but alignment, carefully maintained, year after year, conversation after conversation with the people responsible for your care. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking right now. This all sounds reasonable. But is it really worth bringing up at an appointment that already feels rushed? I'd ask you to consider this. A few minutes of slightly uncomfortable conversation today is a small price compared to the alternative of discovering these interactions only after something serious has already happened. If this video helped clarify something for you or made you look at your own medicine cabinet a little differently than you did 40 minutes ago, consider staying connected to this channel because this is exactly the kind of thing we focus on here. Not quick fixes. Not exaggerated, sensational claims. Just clear, practical understanding of how your body actually works and what genuinely makes a meaningful difference over time. And if you know someone in your life taking medications daily, especially someone past 60, sharing this with them today could make a real, tangible impact on their future. Because sometimes the most important changes in a person's health begin with one simple realization: that what worked perfectly well a decade ago may genuinely need to be looked at again now, with fresh eyes and a current understanding of where your body actually stands. If this helped you see your own medicine cabinet a little differently, type "I finished" below right now and share this with one specific person: your mother, your father, your spouse, a close friend, anyone over 60 taking something daily without ever giving it a second thought. Sometimes the most important change in someone's life starts with one honest question, asked at exactly the right appointment, at exactly the right time. And next time, we're going even deeper into one of the quietest risks of all, the everyday habit at breakfast that's been raising blood pressure numbers for years without anyone ever connecting the dots. You'll want to be here for that one because it touches nearly everyone watching this video right now, whether they realize it yet or not.